When you grow emotionally and mentally, something profound begins to happen inside you. Your silence becomes louder than your reactions ever were. The desire to respond, to clap back, to expose, to explain yourself starts to fade. Not because you don't have words, not because you lack the ability to defend yourself, but because you've stepped into a space where your peace is far more valuable than being understood by someone who chose to misunderstand you. Growth is not about showing them what they lost. It's about recognizing what you found within yourself. There is a sacred shift that occurs when you begin to understand that your energy is a currency, and every time you react to someone who no longer deserves access to your spirit, you're spending what can never be refunded. You no longer need to block him, because blocking is a physical act. It's on your screen, it's in your phone, but outgrowing someone happens in your soul. Blocking him may remove his number, but outgrowing him removes his grip on your mind. That's where the true freedom lies. Not in deleting a contact, but in deleting the connection between your value and his presence. Many people will tell you to block someone to find peace, and while it's sometimes necessary, it's often a surface level fix for a much deeper problem. The deeper solution isn't cutting off communication, it's cutting off dependency. When you grow, you no longer need their silence to make you feel rejected. You no longer interpret distance as devaluation. You stop reading between the lines. You stop waiting for texts. You stop needing closure. Because growth gives you a new lens. And through that lens, you realize you were never truly abandoned. You were redirected back to yourself. And when that realization hits, you feel something different in your body. You stop scrolling through memories with a heavy heart. You stop checking their online status. You stop replaying what you should have said or done. The mental loops stop because you've climbed out of the space where their actions once had the power to destabilize your worth. And when that power is gone, there's nothing left to react to. Silence becomes your response, not because you're suppressing, but because you're elevated. The air is different up here. People who once disrupted your peace now look small from the mountain you've climbed. And when someone who once controlled your emotions reaches out, you feel nothing. Not anger, not bitterness, not longing. Just clarity. That's the sound of healing. That's the voice of growth. It doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It just doesn't blinch. You don't outgrow someone because you're bitter. You outgrow them because the version of you that once clung to their potential no longer exists. And when you evolve, you look back and realize that your reactions were never a reflection of them. They were a reflection of your wounds. Once those wounds begin to close, the noise quiets. You no longer need to slam the door. It just shuts on its own because your energy no longer fits in the room. People often think growth means becoming louder, more assertive, more vocal, but the deepest growth is quiet. It's internal. It's not performance, it's peace. It's in the moments when someone tries to provoke you and you simply smile. Not because you're pretending, but because you genuinely don't need to prove your position anymore. You're not afraid to lose them. You've already found yourself. There's a kind of liberation that comes when you stop trying to be seen by people who only looked at you when it was convenient. When you stop fighting for a place in someone's life and start building a life where your presence is honored by you first, the game changes. You don't wait by the phone. You don't wonder why they disappeared. You just understand that they were part of the chapter, not the conclusion. And that silence, your silence, is not absence. It is presence in its highest form. It says, I've chosen me. And that is louder than any text you could send, any words you could speak. You don't have to tell them they hurt you. You don't have to announce that you've moved on. You simply live in such a way that makes their behavior irrelevant. That's the kind of power no one can take from you. When you reach that place, you realize that not everyone is meant to walk with you. Some people were only meant to wake you up, and they did. But now, you walk differently. You speak less. You listen more. You observe with discernment, not desperation. Your energy is no longer on discount. And suddenly what you once chased now feels distant, small, beneath the space you now occupy. Your growth doesn't scream. It just becomes undeniable. The people who once saw you as an option begin to wonder how they lost access. They don't realize it wasn't a sudden block. It was a gradual outgrowing. It was your healing speaking in silence. It was your self-worth moving without a sound. And that shift is what makes your silence louder than any reaction ever could. Negative emotions are like uninvited guests. They don't knock, they just show up. And if you're not careful, they'll take a seat at your table, eat up your peace, and rent out your headspace for free. The truth is, most people don't realize they've handed over the keys to their emotions until the damage is already done. Someone says something that triggers a memory, a wound, a moment from the past, and suddenly your mood changes, your energy shifts, and your focus is hijacked. You didn't plan for it, you didn't want it, but it happened because you haven't mastered the most important thing in your life. Your emotional state. Emotional mastery isn't about pretending that you don't feel pain. It's about deciding what gets to stay and what must be released. It's about understanding that your emotions are signals, not shackles. They're supposed to inform you, not imprison you. The problem is we were never taught how to separate the emotion from the identity. So when someone hurt us, we didn't just feel rejected, we became rejection. We didn't just experience sadness, we became sadness. That's where the downward spiral begins. You start living from a place of reaction instead of reflection. When you let your emotions control your actions, you become a puppet to your past. Someone texts you after ignoring you for weeks and your entire day is thrown off. You don't know whether to respond or stay silent, whether to be kind or be cold, and your peace is now sitting in their hands. That's not strength. That's emotional dependency. That's giving someone else the power to dictate how you feel, how you act, how you think. And the most dangerous part, you may not even realize you're doing it. You've got to learn how to stop renting out your emotions to people who have no business being in your space. Not everyone deserves access to your feelings. Just because someone was once close doesn't mean they have the right to influence how you move today. And no, it's not being cold. It's being in control. It's understanding that your peace is your responsibility. No one else is going to protect it like you can. No one else is going to guard your mental space if you keep throwing the door open every time someone from your past knocks. That doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you choose where to place your energy. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop revisiting old conversations in your head, hoping to find a different outcome. You stop looking for closure in the mouth of someone who was never honest with you in the first place. That's what emotional freedom looks like. It's not apathy, it's alignment. It's choosing to feel what's real without being ruled by it. When you master your emotions, you begin to see people for who they really are, not who you wanted them to be. You're no longer blind to the patterns. You're not fooled by potential. You no longer chase validation in places that once drained you. You see things for what they are and accept them without bitterness. That's growth. That's the shift from reaction to observation. You don't need to explode. You don't need to confront everyone who wronged you. You simply outgrow the urge to fight for attention, love, or validation. There is power in being able to feel every emotion and not act on every impulse. It's discipline. It's strength. It's what separates those who constantly repeat cycles from those who break them. Most people live their lives responding to everything. They respond to every insult, every ghosted message, every slight change in tone. But when you take control of your internal world, you begin to move from intention, not impulse. You pause before reacting. You breathe before speaking. You detach before drowning. Emotional mastery is about creating space between what happens and how you choose to respond. That space is where your power lives. That's the space where you decide, this isn't worth my energy, or this doesn't deserve my reaction. It's the space where you remember your worth doesn't decrease because someone couldn't see it. You begin to value your peace over being right. You choose calm over chaos. And people may not understand that shift, but it's not for them to understand. It's for you to embody. Think about how much time you've wasted reacting to people who weren't even worthy of a thought. Think about how many nights you've stayed awake rehearsing conversations, planning what you'll say if they ever come back. Think about the emotional rent you've paid for people who walked away without looking back. That time, that energy, that pain, it all adds up. And yet none of it added to your life. That's the cost of unmastered emotions. That's the price you pay when you don't guard your peace. You can't control what others do, but you can control how much of yourself you give away in response to their actions. You can stop the cycle. You can shift the pattern. You can reclaim your mind. It starts by recognizing that your emotions are yours to govern. No one else should be allowed to reach into your chest and change your temperature without your permission. You have the right to feel, to process, to grow, but never to be owned by emotions triggered by people who no longer align with your vision, your values, or your future. Closure is one of the most misunderstood and overrated concepts when it comes to healing. We chase it like it's a missing puzzle piece, as if hearing the right explanation, the perfect apology, or the final goodbye will unlock our peace and release the pain. But the truth is, closure doesn't come from them. It never has. It comes from you deciding that you no longer need their words to validate your worth, justify their actions, or make sense. Waiting for closure from someone who hurt you is like waiting for the wound to heal by asking the knife why it cut you. It's not only unproductive, it's self-destructive. So many people stay emotionally stuck because they believe healing requires an external event. They think that when he apologizes, when he finally admits what he did, when he comes back with regret in his eyes, they'll be able to move on. But that mindset is what keeps you in emotional bondage. Because the apology might never come, the explanation may never make sense, and the regret you hope to see may never show up. People who have wronged you aren't always interested in your healing. Some are perfectly content with leaving your heart in confusion. And the longer you wait for them to come back and fix it, the more power you give away. Closure is not an event, it's a decision. It's a conscious moment where you choose to stop reliving the story that keeps you broken. It's the moment you say, this chapter doesn't need another page to end. I can close it myself. And in that moment, you stop obsessing over the why, the how, the what if. You stop rereading the old messages. You stop interpreting their silence as mystery. You stop projecting your hope onto someone who already showed you what they were capable of. It's not about revenge, not about bitterness. It's about finally releasing yourself from the prison of unanswered questions. Real closure begins when you stop looking outward for emotional rescue. You sit with the pain not to indulge in it, but to understand it. You let it burn, let it speak, let it teach. And slowly clarity begins to rise. You start to see that not everyone who exits your life deserves a headline. Some people are not meant to give you closure. They're meant to awaken something in you that forces you to grow. And when you finally internalize that, you no longer need their return. Their absence becomes the answer. People crave closure because they want certainty. They want to label what happened, make sense of it, wrap it up in neat emotional packaging. But relationships, especially broken ones, are rarely that tidy. Sometimes people leave without explanation because they lack the courage to face the damage they caused. Sometimes they lie to themselves so effectively that they'll never admit the truth, not even to themselves. And other times, they simply don't care enough to close the door properly. And that's a hard truth to swallow, but it's still the truth. You might never understand why someone changed, why they ghosted, why they betrayed you, or why they stopped showing up. And that's okay. You don't need all the answers to move on. You only need one powerful belief. You deserve peace, regardless of their explanation. The healing doesn't come from their words. It comes from your decision to value your peace more than your pain. It comes from finally trusting that their silence isn't a reflection of your value, but a reflection of their character. There is immense freedom in choosing closure on your own terms. You reclaim your energy. You stop waiting for the past to rewrite itself. You stop bargaining with memories. You stop trying to get someone to acknowledge something may never be emotionally equipped to face. And when you do that, you begin to breathe again. You start showing up for yourself in ways they never did. You begin building a new story, one where you are no longer the victim of someone else's indecision. Choosing your own closure also means you stop reopening wounds just to see if they're still bleeding. You stop romanticizing moments that were laced with manipulation or neglect. You tell yourself the truth even when it hurts, because truth is the beginning of transformation. You stop needing them to see your worth because you finally see it for yourself. You stop needing justice because you are too focused on your own growth to worry about someone else's karma. That's real closure. It's not about what they give you, it's about what you give yourself. The more you mature emotionally, the more you realize that waiting for someone to give you closure is a form of self-sabotage. It's a delay tactic. It gives your mind a reason to stay in the past, to keep rehashing conversations, to keep holding on to hope wrapped in pain. And while that may feel comforting in the short term, it drains your spirit in the long term. You can't move forward while your heart is anchored to something that's already gone. You can't build new joy while you're clinging to old confusion. Letting go doesn't mean you're okay with what happened. It doesn't mean you condone the betrayal, the abandonment, or the lies. It means you've decided not to let it define you. It means you've chosen growth over grasping, peace over proof, healing over history. And that shift doesn't happen all at once. It's daily. It's intentional. It's quiet. But it's powerful. Because the moment you stop needing their closure is the moment you open the door to your own freedom. Healing doesn't always look the way we expect it to. It's not this smooth, linear process where each day feels lighter than the last. Sometimes healing feels like chaos. One moment you feel empowered, and the next you're drowning in memories you thought you buried. That's the reality most people don't talk about. Healing is messy, it's inconsistent, it's uncomfortable, but it's also necessary. And it's never about the other person. It's about your decision to no longer carry pain that was never meant to stay. You don't wake up one day and suddenly forget everything that happened. The mind holds on. It replays conversations, clings to the what ifs, and romanticizes even the moments that broke you. And you'll be tempted to reach out. You'll be tempted to seek comfort in the same place that caused the pain. But healing begins when you resist that urge. When you stop negotiating with the past. When you stop expecting the one who hurt you to rescue you from the damage they left behind. That's not their job. That's your awakening. Real healing requires brutal honesty. You have to stop lying to yourself about who they were. You have to stop editing the truth to fit your hopes. You have to look at the situation as it was, not as you wished it had been. That's where the freedom begins. When you strip the illusion and accept the reality, you stop grieving a fantasy. And that's a powerful turning point. Because when you're no longer chained to who you thought they were, you're finally free to see them for who they actually were. And often, it's not someone who deserved your loyalty in the first place. Every time you think of going back or reaching out, remember what it cost you. Remember the sleepless nights, the confusion, the way you questioned your worth, the way you tried so hard to be enough for someone who wasn't even trying to meet you halfway. Healing asks you to remember the full story, not just the highlights, not just the passion or the potential, but the pain too. Because if you forget how it felt to be emotionally neglected, you'll fall into the same pattern again. You'll hand your heart to someone who has already shown you they don't know how to handle it. Part of the healing process is recognizing the role you played, not to blame yourself, but to take back your power. You tolerated behavior that made you question yourself. You ignored red flags because your heart was louder than your mind. You gave second, third, and 10th chances when you should have walked away after the first betrayal. That's not weakness. That's a reflection of your capacity to love deeply. But now you're learning that loving deeply doesn't mean sacrificing yourself. It means knowing when to walk away from what doesn't honor you. You will grieve the loss, not just of the person, but of the future you imagined, the life you built in your mind, the moments you thought would last. And that grief will come in waves. It'll catch you off guard. It'll make you feel like you're going backward. But that's all part of the process. Healing is not about forgetting. It's about detaching. It's about no longer giving energy to something that drains you. And each time you choose peace over pain, each time you choose solitude over chaos, you are healing, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment. There will be days when the silence feels heavy, when you wonder if they ever cared, when you question whether you were the problem. But silence is not proof of your inadequacy. Their absence doesn't mean you were unworthy. It simply means they were never capable of offering the love you needed. That realization stings, but it also saves you. Because once you stop expecting them to return as someone better, you can finally become someone stronger. Healing also means reclaiming your identity. For too long, your sense of self may have been wrapped up in that relationship. You lost yourself in their validation, in the role you played, in the hope that they would finally see your worth. But now you have to come back to yourself. You have to remember who you were before the heartbreak, before you started shrinking to be accepted, before you gave your power away in exchange for crumbs of attention. That's the essence of healing. It's not just about moving on from them. It's about returning to you. You'll start to feel the shift when the things that used to trigger you no longer hold power. When the memories lose their emotional grip, when their name becomes just another name, not a wound. You'll know you're healing when peace feels more valuable than closure. When your boundaries become non-negotiable. When self-respect becomes louder than longing. And all of this happens quietly, gradually, painfully, but beautifully. Not in a single moment, but in the thousands of micro decisions you make each day to choose yourself. There's no rush. Healing takes time. It's not a race, it's a resurrection of your voice, your worth, your intuition. And even in your lowest moments, you are rebuilding. The tears, the confusion, the loneliness, they're all part of the reconstruction. You are not broken. You are being rebuilt, stronger, wiser, clearer. Every step away from what hurt you is a step toward what will heal you. When you begin to truly value yourself, something powerful happens. You no longer chase after what's not meant for you. The urge to prove your worth to someone who consistently overlooked it starts to fade. You stop trying to be seen by someone who kept looking away. You stop twisting yourself into someone else's ideal just to be loved a little. You begin to understand that attention is not the same as affection. That desire is not the same as respect. And that love without consistency is just emotional confusion. And once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. That's when the shift begins. You realize that the way someone treats you is not a reflection of your worth, but of their capacity. And for far too long, you made excuses for that person's inability to love you properly. You called it trauma, or they just need time, or I can help them heal, when in reality, what they needed wasn't your sacrifice, it was your absence. Because some people only learn to value something once it's gone. But you're not an emotional rehabilitation center. You're not obligated to be the one who teaches someone how to love while your heart is bleeding in the process. There's a deep kind of power in walking away quietly, without rage, without a need to argue, without a final message explaining your worth. The old version of you might have begged for closure, sent one last paragraph, or waited days to hear back. But when you grow, your silence becomes your strength. You don't need them to validate your pain. You don't need them to tell you why they changed. You don't need a proper goodbye from someone who never valued your presence. When you understand your value, you stop over-explaining and start observing. And if someone's behavior doesn't match their words, you simply choose peace and keep moving. Self-worth changes everything. It redefines how you engage with people. It stops you from accepting halfway love, from settling for inconsistent energy, from chasing apologies that were never going to come. You stop looking for healing in broken places. You stop romanticizing red flags because you finally believe that you deserve more. And that belief, once it's rooted in you, becomes unshakable. You begin to attract different kinds of people. Not because they're different, but because you are. You've elevated your frequency. And the people who once fit into your life no longer align with your higher self. There's a maturity that comes with growth. Not everyone you lose is a loss. Sometimes what feels like rejection is really protection. You might not have seen it back then because you were operating from a place of need, needing love, needing validation, needing to feel chosen. But as you grow, you start to choose yourself. And with that choice comes clarity. You can look back and see how often you were begging to be included in someone's life who didn't even deserve access to yours. How many times you prioritized them while they treated you as an option. That awareness hurts, but it also heals. There's no need to block someone when you've outgrown the version of you who would have tolerated their presence. Blocking might give you a sense of short-term control, but true transformation doesn't come from cutting someone off. It comes from cutting off the emotional supply that fed their relevance in your life. You don't need to hide from them when you've risen above them energetically. When you no longer engage, when you no longer react, when their name doesn't spark chaos in your spirit, you've already won. You've outgrown the need for revenge, for closure, for validation. You've outgrown the need to be noticed. Growth teaches you patience with yourself. You learn that healing doesn't mean you won't miss them. It doesn't mean the memories disappear. But the difference now is you don't act on those emotions. You feel them, you acknowledge them, and then you let them pass through without disrupting your peace. That's how emotional discipline begins. You don't suppress your feelings, you just don't let them govern your action. You don't allow your emotions to drag you back into places you've outgrown. That kind of self-regulation is powerful, and it's a skill that builds over time through deep self-respect. Eventually, the version of you that once accepted breadcrumbs starts demanding the full meal. Not through begging, not through pleading, but simply by no longer settling. You create new standards, not out of bitterness, but out of wholeness. You don't seek perfection in others, but you recognize patterns. You don't cling to potential, you observe consistency. You don't crave attention, you seek alignment. And when something doesn't match your new level of self-awareness, you let it go. Not because you're heartless, but because you're healed. Self-worth makes you less reactive and more intentional. You don't argue to prove your point. You don't stay in spaces where your value is constantly questioned. You don't chase love. You embody it. You walk with the quiet confidence of someone who knows that what's meant for them will never have to be forced. You show up differently, not because you become cold, but because you become clear, and clarity breeds peace. The kind of peace that cannot be disturbed by someone else's confusion, inconsistency, or immaturity. This transformation isn't loud. It doesn't require an audience. It happens in the quiet moments when you choose not to respond to an old trigger, when you delete the message before sending it, when you unfollow without announcing it, when you choose solitude over being half loved. These are the small acts of self-worth that build a new foundation. You stop seeking completion in another person and realize you were whole all along. You just needed to stop shrinking for people who were too small to handle your magnitude. And now you expand unapologetically. Healing is not an event. It's a decision you have to make every single day. You don't just wake up one morning magically over the pain, the betrayal, or the disappointment. No. Healing is messy. It's layered. It's uncomfortable. It brings up memories you try to suppress. It forces you to face versions of yourself you ignored for too long. But when you commit to healing, you're no longer giving your past permission to dictate your future. You're no longer allowing what hurt you to define how you see yourself, how you interact with the world, or what you believe you deserve. Every time you resist the temptation to go back to what broke you, you're healing. Every time you silence that urge to send a message just to feel noticed again, you're healing. Every time you choose to stay home and reflect instead of chasing temporary distractions, you're healing. But this healing doesn't always feel like progress. Sometimes it feels like loneliness. Sometimes it feels like grief. Sometimes it feels like confusion. But even those emotions are proof that something inside you is shifting. that you're no longer living on autopilot, that you're waking up to your value and reclaiming your emotional power, one moment at a time. What most people don't understand is that healing isn't about getting back to who you were before the pain. It's about growing into someone stronger because of it. It's about unlearning habits that were rooted in survival and rebuilding patterns that support your growth. Maybe you used to cling to people who hurt you because deep down you believed you weren't worthy of better. Maybe you tolerated inconsistency because you were afraid of being alone. Maybe you confused chaos with love because you never experienced safety in relationships. Healing forces you to confront these beliefs and rewire your entire perception of love, worth, and connection. You begin to see the difference between emotional hunger and emotional fulfillment. You stop settling for attention when what your soul really craves is connection. You stop mistaking butterflies in your stomach for red flags waving in disguise. You become more mindful of who you allow into your space, not because you've become cold, but because you finally realize your energy is sacred. And not everyone deserves access to it. Healing sharpens your discernment. You no longer ignore patterns just because someone says all the right things. You observe, you assess, and you make decisions not from a place of desperation, but from a place of clarity. This process doesn't come without resistance. Your old self will try to pull you back into familiar pain. You'll hear the voice that says, maybe I was too sensitive, or maybe I overreacted. That's the voice of the version of you that normalized neglect, minimized your needs, and rationalized mistreatment. You don't silence that voice with hate. You silence it with truth. You remind yourself of what really happened. You go back and comfort the version of you who didn't know any better. You start becoming the protector and provider of your own emotional world. And there will be days where the healing feels exhausting, days when you question if you've made any progress at all, days when a memory, a song, a place, or even a scent pulls you back into a wave of sadness. But that's not regression, that's remembrance. Your brain is processing, your heart is learning to let go. And you have to allow yourself to feel without labeling those feelings as weakness. Strength is not the absence of emotion. Strength is your willingness to sit with discomfort without needing to escape it. It's staying present with your pain until the lesson reveals itself. Eventually, the triggers lose their grip. The memory stops bringing tears. The name doesn't shake your peace. The need to understand why it happened is replaced with, what did I learn? You no longer crave answers from the person who hurt you because you've answered the questions within yourself. You stop seeking apologies and start offering forgiveness. Not for them, but for you. Because carrying resentment is like drinking poison hoping the other person dies. Forgiveness isn't saying what happened was okay. It's saying you're done letting it define your emotional environment. Through healing, you rediscover parts of yourself that were buried under emotional pain. The hobbies you abandoned, the dreams you shelved, the lightness you forgot you could feel. You become reacquainted with your joy, not as something dependent on others, but as something self-sourced. You realize that your peace is not conditional. It's your default when you stop entertaining what disturbs it. You stop waiting for someone to come along and make you whole. You are no longer waiting. You are building. You are evolving. You are choosing you, not in a moment of spite, but in a lifetime of self-honor. You stop measuring your healing by how quickly you move on and start measuring it by how often you choose not to abandon yourself. Every boundary you uphold is healing. Every time you say no when it feels inconvenient but necessary, you're healing. Every time you rest instead of overperforming to feel worthy, you're healing. And every time you choose silence over begging, peace over proving, and solitude over toxic company. The work is invisible at first. No one sees the inner battles. No one applauds the discipline it takes to not self-sabotage. But that doesn't make it any less valid. Healing is a journey with no final destination. It's a lifestyle. It's not about never feeling pain again. It's about knowing that pain no longer controls you. It's about knowing that even when you're triggered, you won't break. That you can observe the emotion, sit with it, release it, and continue moving forward. You begin to trust yourself again, to trust your decisions, to trust your instincts, to trust your worth. Because that's what healing truly is. It's not the absence of wounds, but the confidence that you can tend to them without losing yourself again.